Our saint that we're going to wander with this week is Saint Juan Diego, who was born in 1474 and died in 1548. His feast day is December 9th. Friends are an important part of life, aren't they? You probably have all kinds of friends. A few of them are close friends you've known for a long time. Some of them are people you go to school with or play sports with who maybe aren't so close to you but are still your friends. But have you ever looked at a person for the first time and thought to yourself, well, that person can't be my friend because... You might have all kinds of reasons for thinking this. You might think the other person is too smart or not smart enough. You might think that he or she dresses differently than your other friends. That person might come from a different country or family background. Whatever the reason, you might find that you've put up a wall between yourself and that person. You don't really do it on purpose, and when you think about it, you're even a little ashamed. But the wall is still there. How can you take it down? Maybe a good way to start is to see this other person not with your own eyes, but with God's eyes. When God looks at this boy or girl, what does he see? Does he see someone who's different, or does he see his own beloved child, loved just as much as you are? Understanding how God's love touches everyone can take a long time. We can be thankful that God gives us plenty of chances to learn and comes into our world to teach us this lesson again and again. One of the most powerful ways God brought this message into this world was through a man named Juan Diego, who lived hundreds of years ago. On a chilly December morning in 1531, Juan Diego walked over the hills of his Mexican homeland to go to Mass. This wasn't so unusual. After all, Juan Diego walked to Mass every Saturday and Sunday morning. It was 9 miles each way, but he didn't mind. During the 7 years Juan Diego had been a Christian, he had grown very close to Jesus. Receiving Jesus in the Eucharist gave Juan Diego peace and strength. Juan Diego was an Aztec Indian. His ancestors had lived in Mexico for centuries, perhaps even thousands of years. Until recently, Juan Diego and his people had lived under the rule of the Aztec tribe. The Aztecs were quite intelligent, but they could also be extremely cruel. Aztecs worshipped many gods, and they believed that these gods demanded sacrifice, even the lives of human beings. Every year, thousands of men, women, and children were killed in the great stone temples of Mexico as part of Aztec worship. But a few years before Juan Diego's December walk, Spanish soldiers had come from across the sea and had conquered the Aztecs. The Spanish could be cruel themselves, and over the centuries many people suffered from diseases and other hardships brought by the conquistadors or Spanish soldiers. But they did bring one good, life-saving thing to the people of Mexico: the good news of Jesus Christ. Like many others, Juan Diego heard the good news. He was taught and baptized by a kind missionary. His new faith gave him strength for his simple but sometimes hard daily life as a weaver and farmer. So on that winter morning, Juan Diego walked to church, so happy to be a Christian that he was willing to travel 9 miles on foot just to receive Jesus in communion. At the top of the hill, Juan Diego stopped. Something strange was going on. The songs of birds burst through the air louder and more beautiful than he'd ever heard. And then he heard something else. It was a human voice, the voice of a woman. And it spoke not the Spanish of the conquerors, not the Latin of the church, but Juan's very own native language, the language of the poor people of Mexico. Juanito, the voice said, calling to him as if he were a beloved little son. Juan Dieguito. He climbed the hill toward the voice, and what he saw amazed him. A woman dressed as an Aztec princess glittered and glowed in the sun. She spoke again, asking Juan Diego where he was going. To church, he answered. The lady told Juan Diego that she was the Virgin Mary. She asked Juan to go straight away to the bishop and ask him to build a church on that very spot. Why? So that all of Juan Diego's people, all those who suffered, might have a place that would remind them of God's love. Juan Diego was stunned, but he hurried on to the bishop's palace. The bishop agreed to see him, and Juan told him what he had seen. But since the bishop was a terribly busy man, he told Juan Diego it would be better to come back later with the whole story in detail. The next day, Juan Diego journeyed again to the city. In the same spot, on the same hill, the Virgin appeared again. Juan told her what had happened with the bishop. He begged her to find someone else to deliver her message. Full of humility, Juan Diego said he was just a small rope, a tiny ladder, the tail end, a leaf. Surely there was someone more powerful and educated, someone the bishop and other important people would take seriously. No, the Virgin said. No one but Juan Diego could deliver the message. Once more, Juan Diego delivered the message to the bishop. The bishop listened, but the story was hard to believe. He ordered Juan Diego to return the next day, but this time with proof. Can you imagine how frustrated Juan Diego must have felt? How could he prove to the bishop that what he had seen was real? The answer came the next day. As he approached the hill, he saw another surprising sight. There, in December, amid rocks and brambles, roses were blooming. Hundreds of roses. Roses never blossomed this time of year. Quickly, Juan Diego opened his tilm, his cloak, and filled it with roses. He rushed to the bishop's palace, carefully guarding the precious blooms. He stood before the bishop and opened his tilma. The roses tumbled out onto the floor, and the bishop's eyes opened wide with surprise. But Juan Diego noticed that the bishop wasn't looking at the roses. He was looking at Juan Diego's tilma. Juan Diego looked down too. Imprinted on the humble patch of cloth he had woven himself was something he never expected to see: the Virgin. A blue, starry veil was draped over her head and hung down her shoulders. Her hands were folded in prayer, and she stood in front of the sun and on top of a dark crescent. It was Jesus' mother. The bishop knew then that every word Juan Diego had spoken was true. He did what Mary had asked and built a church on that spot where she had appeared, which you can visit today just as millions of other people do every year. They visit the church to wonder at the miraculous image of Mary on Juan Diego's tilma, the image that we call Our Lady of Guadalupe. When they see the tilma, they're reminded of the very important message that God gave us through this gift to Juan Diego. God's love and peace are for all people, rich and poor, all over this world He's made. God's gift to Juan Diego showed the leaders of the church in Mexico how much God loves all people. Do you sometimes forget that God loves all the people around you just as much as He loves you?